Hey, CW Apes, Mr. Kennedy here. Today we're going to talk about chapter 22 of your textbook and food resources. We're going to dig deep today into everything agriculture. We're going to look at world food and nutrition, food sources, the Green Revolution, genetic engineering or GMO crops, and just kind of like the past, present, and future of agriculture and food security for our planet. So let's dig in and take a look at what's going on. Okay. One of the first things that I want to address with you when it comes to agriculture is there's a common misconception out there that we have starving people in the world because farmers just don't produce enough food. That is a misconception when in reality, food supplies have more than kept up with human population demands over the past 2 centuries. And even during the past 40 years, while our population has grown at a rate of about 1.7%, our food production has increased at a level of 2.2%. So even though our population is getting bigger and we're losing farmland in exchange for maybe housing tracts and roads and things like that, we're still producing more than enough food to feed all of the people of the planet. Um, Back in 1960, 60% of the population of developing countries was considered chronically undernourished. Today, it's less than 16%. So you can see we're gaining on this issue of chronic hunger and food security. We're doing a much better job than we were, 40, 50 years ago, but there's still room for improvement. And yes, there are still people that go without on a daily basis. And the big question is why? Well, to answer the question why, I really, we dig into an area that is a multifaceted problem, but probably the one thing that we got to look at as a driving force behind the why is the word poverty. Poverty is the greatest threat to food security on a global basis. Food security is your ability to obtain sufficient food on a daily basis. And if you don't have money to buy it at the end of the day, it's hard to come by the food that you need to feed yourself or your family. So it's a multifaceted problem, right? In developing countries, maybe providing land grants, credit, education for women who do 50 to 70% of the farm work in developing countries might be an important first step towards food security. But even doing that wouldn't fix the whole problem on a global scale. If you look at hunger around the world, you can see light and dark areas on this map. The lighter areas have less of an issue with food security than the darker areas. And when you think about the darker areas on the map, there's some underlying common threads that these darker areas have in common, like poverty, like less technology, maybe shorter growing seasons, or just land that's available to grow food. Okay. Some of these things can be overcome, other things can't. It would be highly frowned upon in South America if we just wiped out all the rainforests so that countries of the equatorial regions could plant crops and grow food to feed their people. So what do, right? Do they leave the rainforest as is and risk food security issues for their people, or do they like plow the rainforest under so that they can grow crops and become self-sustaining? Right? It's a multifaceted problem with difficult questions to answer. Going back to the idea of poverty, when you think about poverty, there's what we call the poverty cycle that I want you to be familiar with. And when you think about the poverty cycle, a lot of times you'll hear people say very callously, those poor people, why don't they just go out and get a job? Then they won't be poor and they can feed themselves. Well, that just kind of shows you the ignorance of a person who might be saying something like that. The reality of the poverty cycle is that when you are poor, and who knows why you're poor, maybe you were born into a family where, no one has an education, no one has like marketable skills, things like that. You're in a developing country. And so you're just trying to scratch out a living or to survive by your wits. Okay. If that's the case, the reality of it is that you're most likely going to be malnourished. You won't have like, fistfuls of money that you can go out and buy fancy dinners with. A lot of people in developing countries live on literally less than $5 a day American money. So being malnourished because you're poor creates a cycle of problems that are very, very difficult to break out of. Being malnourished means you will have an increased susceptibility to disease. Your body won't be able to fight off illness as well, which translates into a shorter life expectancy or a high death rate. Provided that you don't get sick, the reality of being malnourished means you'll have decreased energy levels. You won't have the energy to go out there and work an 8, 12-hour day, whatever is necessary to earn enough money to feed your family. When it comes to learning new skills, try focusing on your studies when your stomach is growling, right? It's not easy. You're exhausted, you're tired, so to go out and learn new skills becomes a problem. Without the new skills, without the low energy, you don't qualify for or you can't maintain high paying jobs. So that puts you right back into poverty, which leads to malnutrition, and the cycle just continues and continues. Okay, so that's the deal with the poverty cycle. Sometimes we don't even have an issue in terms of like education or job skills. It's just the sheer landmass that you were born on. So here's a picture of Africa. Africa could be the #1 beef producing region in the world. Unfortunately, aside from all of the other amazing things Africa is blessed with, it's blessed with this little bug here called the tsetse fly. The tsetse fly spreads African sleeping sickness, or basically a parasite called the trypanosome. And this trypanosome, it doesn't care if you're a human, a cow, or whatever. Okay, it will bite you. The fly will bite you for looking for a blood meal, just like a mosquito does. And that's how the parasite gets into your bloodstream. Now, just to kind of sum up what happens with the trypanosome in your bloodstream, eventually you just fall asleep and you don't wake up. Okay, so that really is what prevents Africa from being the #1 beef producing region of the world and being able to self-support. Malaria is another issue for Africa, that's spread by the Anopheles mosquito. Believe me when I tell you, we have tried to eradicate these insects, but they have become like resistant to even our most potent pesticides. So like, what do? Biggest problem for these types of insects is the parasites that they carry are, harbored in native species like lions and giraffe and stuff like that. So the reality of it is you probably will never be able to get rid of this parasite, and you'll always have to deal with this in this country. Okay. Another issue that creates a problem for food security is just a straight up famine. Famines are characterized by large-scale food shortages, mass starvation, social disruption, and economic chaos. Now, there are all kinds of things that can lead to famine. The most common is something like a drought or a fire. Once those droughts hit, farms, crops fail, and that just translates into literally millions of people not having enough food to eat. And while it's a common thing for people to assume, well, this only happens someplace like Africa where it's hot and dry. There was actually a famine not that long ago that happened in Ireland that caused a whole bunch of people to migrate to the United States. It was the Irish potato blight. So just to kind of sum that up, everybody in Ireland, were growing potatoes as their staple crop. And they came across one particular variety of plant that produced lots and lots of potatoes. So everybody was planting it. Lo and behold, everybody sowed their crops at the beginning of the season, and it started to rain. And a water mold just like developed in the soil that wreaked havoc on all these crops. The crops failed, and facing starvation, people jumped on boats and sailed to the New World. And that's how the Irish came to the United States, right? So mass migrations often occur because the productive capacity of an area, a country, a farm belt has been sacrificed. And environmental conditions are often the immediate trigger. Could be in the case of someplace hot and dry, a drought, or in the case of Ireland, too much rain, right? Armed conflict, political oppression, commodity hoarding, price gouging, wars, and poverty are common underlying causes of these famines. Okay, so just to kind of continue on this famine issue, we do try anytime a famine occurs in today's world to provide aid to people groups or countries who are struggling with famine. So aid policies of rich countries, they vary, but the idea is that once a famine has been noticed, rich countries will often send surplus commodities to the countries that need it. The unfortunate thing is those surplus commodities don't always make it to the folks that need it. So when you think about, maybe the U.S. sends 100 tons of rice or something like that to another country. The problem that you run into is that in order to distribute that material, you have to herd people into feeding camps, which can be counterproductive. So now you've put all these people into a confined space where disease might spread. Many might die on the way. Others die in epidemics from violence. The other issue that you might run into is that, unfortunately, not everybody in these countries where we're sending aid operates on what I would call the up and up, and they might just hoard all the aid that's coming in from a wealthy country and not give it to the people that need it. Okay. Another thing to think about when it comes to food security problems on a global scale is overeating. Overeating is a growing problem, no pun intended. In the U.S. and other developed countries, highly processed foods that are rich in sugar and fat have become a large part of our diet. In the United States alone, 64% of Americans are overweight. 33% are considered obese, meaning they are 20% or more over their ideal weight, or have a body mass index of greater than 30 kilograms per meter squared. Being overweight increases your chances of hypertension, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, arthritis, respiratory problems, and cancer. Okay. The human species, as an organism on this planet, is the only species that assigns emotion to food. So when you think about diet and lifestyle changes, we don't eat just because we're hungry. We eat for entertainment. We eat because we're happy. We eat because we're sad. We eat because we're bored. We eat just because we like the way something tastes. And all too often, as a species, we'll eat way more calories than what we need to. So if you have one country, people group, or individual that is overeating, that's going to restrict food availability for someone else. Okay. So this kind of gives you an idea on a global scale of, where the calories are going. So developing countries' daily caloric intake continues to increase at a rate much higher than what we see in the rest of the world or in developing countries. Now, it's fair to say that the rest of the world and developing countries are also increasing, but the developed countries are increasing faster. Okay. So when you think about nutrition, we need the right kinds of food, and we need them in the right proportions to stay healthy. We got to watch out for, our proportions of carbs and fats and all that kind of stuff like that. You probably remember this from your health classes. So I don't want to spend forever on this. I'll just simply throw it out like this and say that generally eating a good variety of foods should give you all the nutrition you need. It's kind of crazy to think about, but, going back to health, the average person needs about 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day, and no more in order to survive. Unfortunately, most people are eating almost double that. Okay. And again, it goes back to, why, we like the way food tastes. We're bored. We're happy, whatever. Okay. This is the food pyramid, Harvard food pyramid, which kind of lays out how much of what you're supposed to be eating and what you're supposed to be getting most of down there at the bottom with regard to exercise. Okay. Vitamins and minerals. So when you think about food security, one of the things to consider is not just how much you have to eat, but also the quality of what it is you're eating. You can be eating lots and lots of food, but also still be malnourished. It's just dependent on what it is you're eating. For example, if I ate nothing but rice, and I mean nothing but rice, like nothing on the rice, just here's a bowl of white rice. Over time, I would end up being malnourished because I wouldn't have the protein that I needed. I wouldn't have all the vitamins and minerals that I needed from just eating white rice and nothing else. Okay. Even if I had tons of white rice to eat, so much white rice to eat that I was stuffed at every meal, it wouldn't matter. I could be malnourished because all I'm eating is white rice. So malnourishment is a condition where you have an imbalance caused by a lack of specific dietary components. So you don't get the vitamins and minerals that you need on a daily basis. 3 billion people suffer from vitamin, or mineral or protein deficiency, which results in premature death and illness. Now, some other nutritional problems that we see on a global scale: iron deficiency. Iron deficiency is the most common dietary imbalance in the world, leads to anemia, insufficient hemoglobin in the blood, increases risks of death from hemorrhage and childbirth, and affects development. Lack of iodine can lead to goiter, as well as stunted growth and reduced mental capacity. A lack of vitamin A affects as many as 140 million children, and 350,000 go blind each year. Protein deficiency is also a problem. Kwashiorkor, which is called, just in plain English, displaced child, occurs mainly in children whose diets lack high quality protein. They end up with discolored skin and a bloated stomach. Marasmus is a wasting disease, basically means to waste away, where you have a diet low in protein and calories. You end up very thin, shriveled, and have a low resistance to infection. Here's just a couple pictures you can see of goiter, right, and the marasmus, or the wasting disease. Okay, so key food sources. Just when you think about where we're going to get our food, worldwide, there are 3 crops that deliver the majority of the needed nutrients to humanity: wheat, rice, and corn. 2 billion metric tons are grown every year globally. And in addition to that, potatoes, barley, oats, rye. These are all staples in moist climates. Cassava, sweet potatoes, and other root crops, tubers, are staples in warmer, wetter climates. When you think about costs and benefits, with such a few number of plants that we focus our attention on, it on one hand is potentially a good thing, because we can develop high yield crops, and we can feed a lot of people just by growing these small number of plant crops. But on the negative side, if there's something that comes in and wipes out the wheat crop for the year, maybe it started raining or something at the wrong time, we could end up facing a famine. The other thing to consider is meat production. In developed countries, meat consumption has risen from 10 kilograms per person in 1960 to 26 kilograms per person per year today. Meat consumption in the U.S. alone has risen from 90 kilograms per person per year to 136 kilograms per person in the same time period. Meat is a concentrated, high-value source of protein. There's iron in it, there's fat and other nutrients in it, but meat production is expensive. So the amount of meat that is produced, the amount of meat that's eaten in a country, can also be used as an indicator of wealth. It takes 80 kilograms of grain to produce 1 kilogram of beef, and that's just feed. We don't even include water or energy here. Okay, so this will just kind of give you a graphic of energy expenditure in calories. Okay, as we look at the industrial world and agriculture, and kind of look at who grows what, this colored graph or map is meant to kind of illustrate who does what. So in the United States, we have largely industrialized agriculture, and you go out to the non-shaded kind of the beige areas, and they don't have any agriculture at all. A lot of times we ask why, why in the upper stretches of North America and Greenland and stuff don't they have agriculture? Well, because it's cold and it's snowing and stuff. And what's up with Australia? How come they got that patch in the middle? Well, because it's a desert. That's why, right? So remember what I said, sometimes countries don't have appropriate growing conditions for agriculture. When you continue looking at this meat issue, we have to look at something called CAFO. CAFO is the Confined Animal Feeding Operations Act, where animals are housed in giant enclosures and fed diets of soy, corn, for rapid growth. Such operations are common in the United States and in China. New breeds of livestock have also been developed, which produce meat rapidly with shorter turnaround times. Unfortunately, this leads to a bunch of animals being packed into tight areas, and disease is common. So we have to use tons and tons of antibiotics to keep these guys healthy and from getting sick. Those antibiotics end up in us, and can translate into problems for us with creating antibiotic resistant bacteria. So we're having a harder time fighting infection. When it comes to energy, it takes 16 times as much fossil fuel to produce a kilogram of meat as it does to produce a kilogram of plant material. UN Food and Agriculture Organization experts estimate that livestock produce 20% of the world's emissions of greenhouse gases. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to tell you you have to become a vegetarian, but what I can say is reducing your meat consumption by 1/5 would reduce your energy consumption more than switching from a standard car to a hybrid. 1/5 simply means that, like, hey, if you eat meat like 5 days out of the week, like Monday through Friday, at some point, one of those days, don't eat meat, right? Just pick one day a week, right? And don't eat meat. When you're looking at the inputs of land, labor, capital, and fossil fuel energy, I've got a couple of graphics that I want to share with you. This one will help you understand the relationship between land, labor, and energy expenditures that are being applied for different activities globally. And this one will help us understand how many different types of animals that we actually eat. One of the things that I just want to stress as I leave this one is, again, that same idea with the plants that I threw out a while ago. There's just a handful of plants that we focus on for food, which is great on one hand because, like I said, we can develop high yield crops and things like that. But if something makes one of those crops fail, we've got a serious problem. Well, the same can happen here with animals. So we're working really hard to develop high yield, strains, if you will, of pigs and cows and sheep and chickens and all of that. But if there's something that makes one of those, livestock sick, it can impact all of the livestock, right? And with a very narrow feeding group like that, we could end up again in a famine. All right. That can force, meat prices to go up and people to go hungry. Okay. One quick fix that is often thrown out there is seafood. People say, well, we'll do aquaculture and all that, and we'll talk more about aquaculture here in a minute. But seafood in and of itself is an important protein source for countries that can't raise cattle and sheep and the like. 1.5 billion people in developing countries rely on the ocean or waterways as their primary food source. Since 1989, all major fisheries in the world have actually declined and become commercially unsustainable. You should remember that from our coverage of end overfishing. If current practices continue, the world's fisheries will be exhausted by the year 2050, right? Because of those huge boats that are out there sweeping up, tons of fish, bycatch, and just throwing it back in. So at the end of the day, seafood is not going to be a sustainable alternative for what we have going on land. All right, ladies and gents, we're going to take a break right here, pause for station identification, and I will be back with part 2 of chapter 22. I'm Mr. Kennedy, and I'll see you in a minute.